In this episode, I speak with Zain Ansari about sustainability in the built environment sector and his startup, Phyta Biodesign, which is innovating natural construction materials which incorporate biodiversity into new builds. The discussion was super interesting. Zain is highly knowledgeable about green architecture, but also about literally bringing biodiversity into construction materials, in his case. The building blocks of walls made of these green natural materials. But we also got to discuss other things, including the tensions between sustainability goals and commercial objectives, and the incentives for business to choose to incorporate biodiversity into their new builds more generally. I started off by asking Zain how his startup is designing more sustainable construction materials.
There are two major things that we are questioning as a startup. Number one, the materiality, the materials that we're using to construct our buildings, and secondly, the design aspect of our buildings in terms of so far, like historically, buildings have been, and the construction industry has been focused on creating uh, environments that are just protecting the human beings. It has always been approached in that way. So it has to be super rigid and super protective. But when we kept on doing that for years and years, what we forgot was that the land on which we're building and the way we are expanding our cities, it also belongs to other species and other organisms that are vital for maintaining and upkeeping our ecosystems and the services that they provide to help the ecosystem survive, right? So what we do is, or our critique to what you're talking about, building and construction, was that how can we make these buildings and the built environment more receptive of natural systems
Yeah.
without any, you know, it's a natural process. So without any mechanical means, how do we make our buildings more receptive of nature? And that kind of led to everything. Yeah.
So what are the sort of like key problems that you see in the built environment? I mean, what are there particular sort of species that are being um, that are affected by the way that we build things in this mindset? Like you say, I could really understand that sort of not thinking about nature basically when we build things. Or is it climate impacts that you're most concerned about? What for you is the driving sort of concerns?
So from our research, what we found was that everything is interlinked, and nature is interlinked. The impact or any action that we take as a singular entity, it impacts a lot of things on various layers, right? So if you ask me like what specific species are in decline, for example, there are different bird species that are in decline. And what happens is that when a particular species decline, it's taken over by an invasive species, and that's even more detrimental for our ecosystems, right? And then, like one of the species that we're working on are the solitary bee population decline, which are pollinator bees, and they're dying, and then other invasive species are taking over over their numbers. And what happens as a result of that is bees are responsible for pollination. And when that does not happen, we see an impact on a massive agricultural scale, and billions of worth of agriculture is at risk because they're declining, right? So it's a very small, tiny species, um, but when they die,
Huge impact.
yeah, we miss out on pollination.
So it's primarily sort of urban wildlife like birds and pollinators that your company is trying to address or
We're
you're
we're
concerned about.
Yes, so we're focused on urban direct urban impacts on critical species decline.
Mm.
And the way, and I always say this, the way, the easiest way to understand why urban centers are important is because
Mm.
in nature, there are natural migration patterns and there are natural circulation patterns for different kinds of species, and they don't stay at one place. They migrate from one area to the other, And often what we find is that these cities fall into these migration patterns, like right in the middle, they become blockades in those migration patterns. So it's very important to think on an infrastructural scale that how do we, host or support these migration patterns where buildings could become bridges, to as resting spots and
Yeah.
as hotels, for example, for birds.
Well, of course, that's one of the projects we host at Eden, of course, is the rewilding projects, which is helping pollinators to channel along the beelines of wildflowers. I guess just like an example of what you're talking about, allowing species to migrate. But I suppose it's the same with birds and other species
Exactly.
as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, okay, that's really interesting. So tell us about some of your designs and how they address these problems.
Okay, so currently we are developing two products in parallel. The first product, which is quite close to, we're in the middle of a pilot test, and hopefully this season we will be monitoring the bee activity in that. So that's focused on solitary bees. Like I said, solitary bees are declining, and they're major pollinators. And one of the reasons why they're declining is the way we design our buildings. They don't have these spaces to live and rest, and hibernate during the seasons.
Mm.
So what we've developed is a modular block system that could be installed in urban landscape, in your house gardens, and it's so we've considered two important aspects. One is the aesthetic side of things, the architectural side of things, that it's not like a bug hotel that you can just put it anywhere. It can become a part of a wall. It can, become a feature wall in your garden, almost like a sculpture. And then at the same time, you can see bees going and living in the cavities. So each block comes with these cavities where the bees can go and lay their eggs and hibernate during the winter season and then hatch and then come out. That's the first product, which is called Apia, and the second one is called Fauna, which is also very interesting, and that's for a larger scale application, almost like that could be applied on architectural facade scales. So it's a system made using 3D printed ceramic blocks. And what we do is it's like a three-part thing that what we're doing there. So one is mapping ecosystem hotspots on facades. Where are the best locations to map, densities where we can introduce ecosystems and natural habitats, and then that becomes a part of the aesthetic design as well.
Mm.
So we use computational design to then create those geometries, and then what we do is we can then 3D print that, yeah, in a modular system that could then be applied and installed on these facades. That's the second thing. And the third thing is that the real-time monitoring and data collection of these species that are inhabiting and the impact that they're creating. So what we're trying to do is create like a nature credit system where, or a nature, a tokenizing nature credits. So this will, for example, if you're a corporation and you're really pressed on with a biodiversity impact, so your facades could become these real-time monitors for species, where, and then you could collect real-time data during the year and then publish it as a report that, oh, we saved this number of birds. So that's the
Yeah.
third part that we're really interested in. That's with the digital development side of things that we're working on. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much I'd like to ask about all this. But maybe just starting with the sort of technical aspects, I suppose. I mean, how do you make something that is simultaneously structurally sound, architecturally sound, and also a habitat? I mean, what's the material and how does that work? And how do you know it's sort of suitable for a bee to sort of live in?
So yeah, so material innovation is really important for us. So we are studying traditional architectural materials. So I come from a purely architecture background. So I've
Mm.
worked with concrete, steel, glass, brick and mortar. And then now we're looking into, for example, mycelium, which is a natural bio-based material. How can we, uh, you know, create a mycelium composition that could be used in exterior settings, and promoting biomaterials in architecture. The reason why we got into using mycelium is because it's found naturally in soil and in tree barks. That's where the bees live, and they're quite used to the microbiomes and the
Right.
environments of mycelium. So we thought, okay, so that's one thing, and then on the other side, people are using mycelium in architecture and as insulation panels, and there's a huge push on how can we use it as a construction material, like a brick or a block. So we bridge the two functions and see how we can create that impact. So it's a bit of an experimental approach. And then we introduce the aesthetics and the computation design and the regenerative design aspect to it. Um, on the other hand, like the other material that we're using is ceramic, and both materials, if you see, they're circular. So we're really pushing for
Mm.
circular materiality as
Mm.
well. That could be easily biodegradable or reused. And ceramic and mycelium, they both are quite aligned with that.
So where could a company sort of um like actually place these sort of blocks? Because they come in sort of blocks, is that right? Or is that right?
Yeah.
And or what sort
Yeah.
of location setting would it be? I mean, could it actually be part of construction, or is it more like decoration? Or is it inside, is it outside? I presume it's outside.
Yes, so Apia, which is which are the blocks for solitary bees,
Yeah.
we are so they're made out of mycelium, so they're not very structural. So
Mm.
we're not saying that we're going to replace a brick,
Sure.
or this brick and concrete side of things. But what we're saying is that this could be applied as a layer on that, like a retrofit approach. And during our R&D, like in the next couple of years, we are trying to achieve the structural integrity of mycelium as well. But at this
Mm.
moment, what it could be used as a feature wall in gardens and roof terraces or anywhere, like a sculptural piece, right? But it's a wall system, so it can still be integrated
Mm.
within walls.
And that would be, and you think that this will like just naturally, that wildlife will just come to inhabit these walls, or do you need to sort of have plants nearby, or how does that work?
Actually, both. We like for example, the bee blocks. We were exhibiting it at different exhibitions last year, and then a lot of people came to us saying that we have these bees and they start drilling holes in our walls, and it's and we have to repair them every year. And then some of them were like, we don't want to destroy the habitat. So there was a lot of emotional attachment to that. So what we said was that, what we told them is that this brick can become a buffer between the walls and the bee habitat, so they won't drill into the walls. It can also become like a protective barrier for them.
Right, right. Fascinating. I also wanted to ask about the sort of business side of it, I suppose. I mean, because it's so difficult, isn't it? Like, obviously, businesses care about the environment, but there has to be a business case for it as well. You mentioned on your website that the designs utilize the benefits of ecosystem services to enhance building performance. What do you mean by performance there?
Yes, so again, a very interesting side of things, that business and nature,
Mm.
they're often like contradicting to each other. And
Yeah.
when we were starting this startup and our focus was just primarily on nature, biodiversity, no one was looking at us because they're like, you're going to save the nature, but how is it benefiting humans?
Mm.
How is it making money?
Yeah.
But which is a very valid question. And I think that we kind of like, started looking at things differently, not just as designers, but also
Mm.
making these solutions business economically viable and business viable as well. So when we re when we restudied our solutions, what we found was, as a result of these applications, it's also enhancing building performances. For example, when you add mycelium has amazing insulation properties, and it's used as an insulator right now, heat insulator, thermal insulator for buildings. So you have thermal regulation. Then the way we are designing these geometries, we're trying to direct stormwater on facades, so it reduces the impact of stormwater in facade, and it could
Yes.
be then collected in reservoirs. And then acoustic buffers. So the geometry and the
Mm.
material helps an acoustic buffer. Like if you add an installation of our product Fauna, for example, it could be a really good acoustic buffer because it adds that depth to the wall. And
Yeah, it's so interesting.
so it's a two-part solution, mm, and it's a good example of how you can rethink conventional architecture to be beneficial for both humans and the nature, and
Mm,
it
yeah.
can make it a good business as well.
And are there any sort of like carbon climate benefits specifically? I mean, presumably the carbon emissions of your material are lower than standard construction materials, or how does that sort of
Yes,
intersect?
I'm glad that you asked this question because that's also a very important focus in our everything that what we're working on. So we're really pushing for scaling up digital fabrication uh, on a large scale. So what digital fabrication does is, for example, if you're 3D printing something, you can decentralize manufacturing, right?
Mm.
You don't have to ship things into
Mm,
different places. You can fabricate it on site, right? So that just eliminates that carbon footprint over there.
mm,
And then you pair it with materials like ceramic or earth materials or natural materials. You then eliminate another layer of carbon emissions. So
mm.
it's really good in terms of carbon footprint. Then I would also like to mention that when for example, Fauna is a perfect example for this. What we're trying to do is, when I say that, promoting receptivity of nature, we allow micro species like algae and moss to deposit over its with time. And these are 40 times more effective at carbon sequestration as compared to trees and larger green
Really?
species that we're focused on. Yes. So
Okay, so
what we're
there's plant life as well. It's not just the sort of
exactly.
the bees and things. Mm,
Yeah. So it becomes that you can imagine it as an ecosystem reserve on your building facade. So it's not just like we're putting planters, we're actually
mm,
allowing things to grow over it with time.
mm.
And then because when you introduce a bird species, for example, the bird droppings are really good natural fertilizers, and
Sure.
when you have birds there, they're going to be bird droppings, but often it's considered as uh, a discomfort from a human side of things. But eventually, with time, they'll start growing organisms such as algae and moss, which are excellent for carbon sequestration. So it can
Mm.
become like an air purifier along
Self-rejuvenating,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with the going back to the sort of business sort of side of it, I mean, obviously like business wants to save on costs. I mean, how do you go about, or what have you found that sort of works well when you're talking about selling this? Like, do you sort of say, well, presumably it's going to cost a certain amount. Do you sort of say, well, this is the, you know, you're getting this nature benefit, so you should spend this, or are you trying to sort of make it to be the same cost as existing materials? How do you sort of frame that? And is there a trade-off, I suppose, is what I'm really asking, to be made?
So the advantage of everything that what we're doing is that we can get the costs similar to what we have right now, or maybe reduce it with time.
Really?
right?
What, to existing
Because
materials?
yeah, to existing materials.
Wow.
Our solutions are not super expensive,
Mm,
and that's also a focus because nature should not be elitist, and nature should solutions to nature should not be elitist, and they should be super adaptable
mm,
and easy to for everyone. So when we at all our exhibitions, we spoke to different homeowners, and we've started selling Apia to different homeowners, and they bought it immediately, and we've never had complaints on it being too expensive. Um, you can and also the modularity of it could control prices, so you don't have to buy like 50 square meters of a product. You could
mm,
buy 4 blocks, for example, and then you can grow it with time. You can, like,
mm,
later on, if you want to add to it, you can add more blocks and your wall grows with time.
mm.
So we're really promoting this idea of um, you can create an impact from a very low scale, from a low budget, all the way to as much as you want to go.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, of course, it's interesting what you said at the start about that, you know, buildings should be designed with nature in mind. Um, and obviously that's brilliant, isn't it? When you have, if you just have that switch out thing and it's to the same cost and everything. But I suppose inevitably there are times where there is going to be sort of conflict, when as the construction industry tries to get greener. And I just wondered if you have a view on that when there are those difficulties. Do you think that there's no way, um, other than simply sort of biting the bullet and saying, you just have to prioritize nature, or is it really, do you think that that cost equivalence is the only way to do it, I suppose?
Okay, I don't think so. I think even if it's more expensive, people would buy it, but it's not. But I'll tell you the
Yeah.
reason why. From talking to different people, and in mega cities like London, or if you see any mega European cities, and in America, California sites, I've been getting a lot of feedback, and I've been talking to a lot of people,
Mm,
and the feedback that I get is that there are no solutions available in the market, right? So,
mm,
there is a huge gap in providing those solutions. Um, Everyone's been focused on creating vertical green walls.
mm,
There are hundreds and thousands of different types of green walls now, but uh, that's not the only solution that we need.
mm,
Covering buildings with green is not the solution. Most of the times the greenery that's being applied
mm,
to those walls are, foreign. They're not. You cannot grow all types of things on walls, right, because of the limitations. So there is a huge gap in this, and I think with the as we are progressing towards digital fabrication, AI integration, and data is becoming very important. I think these kind of solutions that what we're working on would be very important because um, uh, it's not just, oh, you install it and leave it there. It is a real time, impact monitor,
mm,
and that's what companies need. And why do they need them? These solutions is because of the new regulations that are coming in. For example, the BNG regulation in the UK.
biodiversity net gain, yeah.
Exactly, and that's been like a huge push from the government, which is amazing. It is a pressure and an opportunity. And I was at this talk last year around this time at Arab, and they were talking about these different, this thing as a driver in the change of mindsets,
Mm,
and also as a policy that could impact and really accelerate that mindset shift. BNG is just in the UK, but then Europe has their own restoration goals and laws, and America and Far East. Yeah, so we're trying to make solutions that are very simple and adaptive, and they could be adapted to different contexts based on the materials and the site ecosystems that they have. So we're not
Mm.
just doing like a one size fit all kind of an approach. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's interesting what you're saying about the green walls because everyone's heard of those, but that's kind of the only thing they've heard of. Um, I mean, so are you optimistic then about the sector moving in this direction of incorporating nature into built environment? Do you think that it's going to happen naturally, or do you think there needs to be more pressure, more regulation, things like P&G, obviously forcing uh, buildings, new builds to have biodiversity incorporated?
Um, so last year, if you had asked me this question, I would have said that there's a huge chance that people would just go with green walls and not these kind of solutions. But this year, I think my mind has changed, and the feedback that I've been getting from a lot of people is they would like to have these things, whether it's a corporate commercial setting or it's um, you know, a, a, a residential setting, a homeowner.
Mm,
Not because the government is saying so, because there is also this human urge to give back to nature,
mm,
and that is becoming quite evident in a lot of people. And when you think of corporates, they are always under pressure because they're creating a bigger mess.
yeah.
So they need to they need to adapt to solutions that are impactful on a larger scale. So we're relying on
Mm,
that push from different corporates because they have, and we have ESGs, we have CSRs, and
yeah.
people need to meet these goals. So we want to help them achieve those. And when they collaborate with us, they're eventually helping nature, right?
Yeah. But it's that sort of brand image or sort of customer facing, I suppose, pressures that
Yeah.
that are coming first. Is that what you're sort of saying? Yeah. Um, Super interesting. I've got to ask you, as an entrepreneur, um, what do you think the role of entrepreneurship is? Obviously, innovation, how important is it? What does it mean to you, as an individual, having started a couple of companies? Uh, what's the role of innovation in bringing sustainability to the sector?
I think uh, it's it's the most important thing. Thinking as an entrepreneur, uh, thinking entrepreneurially towards nature is very important. Because, like you said, and you asked me this question several times in our talk, was what's the business side of things? How is it working as a business?
Yeah.
Because there is one way of looking at things as an activist,
Mm.
as someone going out on the streets and protesting for things,
But will that
and
work?
there's
Yeah.
one, yeah, exactly. But there's one way actually working with the system and collaborating with the system and showing them there are different ways and different solutions out there, and they're easy to adapt. And there are innovations, there's new technology, and we're taking advantage of that. All you have to do is, have a bit of faith and, invest in these solutions. And eventually it's all about, if you get that uh, uh, investment of interest,
Mm.
number one, that can push things in a very positive direction.
Mm.
So I believe in entrepreneurship. The way I approach it, as a solution to nature, is it's a collaborative activism between the system and between the people who are doing wrong, and or who, knowingly or unknowingly, and you go to them and you say that, okay, so this is the impact that's been made, it's bad, but these are the solutions. So they don't have the time to think for solutions, so they need people like us to provide them solutions, and that's where entrepreneurship comes into play.
I think that's a fantastic end note. This podcast. Thank you so much, Zane, for talking us through the work at Phyta Biodesign, and I'll make sure to include links to your website and pictures of the Apia and so forth, so people can have a look. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.